got a great event coming up right now with Keir. So she's an artist, a geographer, a conservationist, and a National Geographic storytelling grantee. Her research is focusing on wildlife crime and the poaching crisis in South Africa. So through mapping, storytelling, photography, and art, she works to share the stories and voices of the local rangers and individuals alongside the rhino. So they experience the effects of that illicit trade firsthand. So I'm going to bring her in right now. Hey, Tara, how are you doing?
Hi, Joe. Good to see you as always. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. It's always great to have you. You know, you were able to spend some time not so long ago in South Africa and get to know some of the rangers, learn, you know, some of the intricacies behind the rhino trade, and it's just not as cut and dry as people think it is. I think you found many different layers, and you've been working to tell that story.
Yes, and I'm excited to share some of that with you all today. So thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to let you take over for a little bit, and then we'll rock a little question action if there's some time.
Amazing. All right. Well, let's get started. So everyone, I truly mean it today when I say that it's such an honor to be a part of this World Ranger Day event. So again, Joe, thank you. Thank you so much. Today, you're also hearing from so many dedicated and also unwaveringly passionate individuals, some of whom are actually directly serving on the front lines defending the wildlife themselves. And as Joe said, you know, during my career and my work funded as a National Geographic Explorer, I've been so fortunate to spend my time alongside rangers, these incredibly determined individuals who make up the boots on the ground that protect our wildlife, who I have also, you know, have a huge amount of admiration and gratitude for. And I've spent time listening to and documenting their stories and their struggles in an effort to better understand the complexities behind this often wildlife-centric and misleading narrative that surrounds the poaching crisis that we encounter in the media. These stories that you hear today, especially those that are coming directly from the mouths of wildlife protectors, are exactly the types of stories we need to be highlighting, focusing on, and also making sure are heard and shared widely, rather than the narratives that are framed with sensationalized language that often pit rangers versus poachers in a battle where dead poachers are often viewed as a simple solution. And rather than narratives that easily leave readers to assume, misinformed, that while the poaching crisis continues, this may mean that rangers are not successfully catching or stopping them. Instead, by diving deeper into understanding the human side of this wildlife story, you know, from the voices of people who are protecting that wildlife, we realize the hard and difficult truths behind their fight for wildlife. And we're also able to see a clearer picture of where we stand as wildlife lovers in the solution. And so in this work, it has become, you know, starkly apparent that there is so much more on the line in these stories than simply the wildlife that's at risk. People, especially the rangers that we're celebrating today that are at the core of it, are under immense pressure. They are fighting what is an uphill battle against incredible challenges that are not only hindering their day-to-day work to protect species, but also threatening their lives and their mental health. And so for that very reason, you know, many of the rangers that I've worked with have chosen to remain completely anonymous, not only for their safety, but also for their family safety and to ensure their ability to continue to do their job protecting wildlife in the future. In particular, today, I really want to focus on the group of rangers that are working within Kruger National Park. And so to get you situated, I'm going to pull up a map and some images so you can visualize where we're headed here. So bear with me for one moment. Hopefully that's working, Joe. So this is Kruger National Park, which is a 7,500 square mile park, which is about the size of New Jersey, located in eastern South Africa along the border with Mozambique. And so something that's so important about this being the setting of a story is that it's also home to the last stronghold of wild rhino left on the planet. Just a little under 4,000 rhino are left in that park, making it, to no surprise, a rhino poaching hotspot. And it's under such an immense threat for poaching that, you know, a lot of these rangers will keep their identities safe. So to keep those identities safe, and rather than reveal them, today I'm actually going to have you walk directly in one of their boots. So you are a park ranger, suiting up for your day's work in Kruger National Park. You groggily throw on your uniform as the first rays of light break the day, and you bend down to lace up your boots. Before you head out the door, you make sure that your worn rifle rests steady on your shoulder. You shake your head in an attempt to reset your mind for the day. The morning air is dry on your lips, and the mapani leaves throughout the lower Sabi region of the park have begun to show hints of orange, yellow, and reds ablaze as winter's brilliance creeps in. As you head out into the bush, your mind wanders to fond flashbacks of goats and sheep meandering by the road of your home village, and you're reminded of the young shepherd that you once were. He still lives inside of you, for it was his skill and talent for identifying the tracks of wildlife that got you to where you are today, a ranger. Your love for nature started among the livestock of your youth and became your pathway into making wildlife your way of life. Your days are now spent alongside much larger four-legged creatures, elephants and giraffe who tower over you in size, and those with teeth, leopard and lion stalking through the bush. You've graduated to a protector of the Big Five within the confines of Kruger's borders, with the gift of time spent along the little treasures of the park as well. The elegant lilac-breasted rollers of 12 brilliant colors, whose shrill squawk feels so unaligned with its outward beauty, and the misunderstood hyena, slinking along the hot tar roads and as jackals blend seamlessly into the earthy underbrush. Or as the calming song of a fish eagle echoes through the air as he soars so effortlessly high above. But your mind continues to wander back in time, reflecting on your first days on the job just a few years ago before the poaching crisis hit, where your largest worries consisted of maintenance and species counts, interactions with guests and the beauty that surrounded you, and moments that you enjoyed the most. You had your toolbox handy just in case one of the many windmills throughout the park needed a repair or a borehole needed attention, and you were armed to take care of the occasional snare removal or reporting of wood stealing. The smell of sage would fill your nostrils as you bent low in the bush to inspect the spoor of a kudu, a leopard, or a rhino if you were very lucky. But today, 30 years later, that same familiar scent of sage fills your nose as you track spoor, only this time the spoor you're tracking is insidious. You're on the trail of 3 known poachers in the bush. You are no longer outfitted with a toolbox, but rather your shoulder is weighed down by a South African National Park's issued rifle, prepared to confront armed individuals on a follow-up. You're clad in a camouflage uniform, on the prowl for your same species in a dedicated effort to protect another more vulnerable than you, the rhino. Over the years, your talent and dedication has allowed you to climb the ranks of the park all the way up to a section ranger in the southernmost part of Kruger, which is this section that's home to the largest concentration of wild rhino left, and therefore a huge target for poaching syndicates. Your nostalgia longs for a pre-2007 before the poaching crisis began. Back then, your community used to admire your work alongside wildlife in the park. Now, they've come to view you as one of the baddies. You're a ranger, all painted with the same brush of disloyalty. The ones who are responsible for arresting someone's brother, someone's uncle, or son. You stand in the way, an obstacle between your community and their path towards quick income. Your town has become a poacher haven, managed by that Robin Hood character building locals up on rhino money. Luckily for you, your personality and character has kept you out of trouble. You've heard the attempts at coercion that your fellow rangers have experienced and have shifted your own behavior to avoid situations where you might potentially be approached by syndicates. You never leave yourself vulnerable at a local bar, a popular spot where coercion and manipulation begin, and you learned very quickly not to give syndicates any reason to owe them a thing. At all costs, you avoid caving under the pressure because one thing is for certain. Just like the mafia, once you're in for life, and your only way out is through a death warrant. Instead, you stick close to your family, you keep your integrity and work ethic top of mind, but even with that focus, the threats and manipulation loom, and your day-to-day in the bush has changed forever. Your most challenging day used to be finding wildlife dangling in a wire snare, the life of a full-grown giraffe cut short in a slow and painful death for just a few pounds of poached flesh. However, moments like that are now overshadowed by what you declare the single most difficult challenge in your work, inside involvement. If you were fending off poachers simply from coming from the outside as non-staff members, the rhino poaching would have been stopped long ago. Even if it were a person from inside the park, a restaurant worker, a technician, a nursery worker involved, it could have been contained, you say. But however, the challenge is now a ranger wearing a uniform. a near impossible threat to contend with. Of the 20 field rangers that you oversee, there are only about 3 to 5 that you feel are trustworthy. So with this in mind, you now actively choose to go and work an armed follow-up alone to avoid having anyone at your back. You stalk through the moonlit bush solo, knowing that the threat of your isolation does not outweigh the threat of placing your trust in fellow potentially corrupt rangers. You firmly believe that there's going to have to be a lot more killing before the role of a ranger ever goes back to what it used to be. That worn toolbox is far from your memory, faded into a nostalgia for which you barely have time for. Your head is now clouded with the weight of maintaining a positive outlook and withstanding the stress that comes from resting this immense challenge on your shoulders. Not one moment in your existence before syndicates began recruiting from the inside did you ever think your job might involve the killing of another human life, caught in a crossfire for your own protection. Now, a psychological consult is part of your tools as a ranger to help you cope with the death you've confronted time and time again. So the shoes that you just walked in belong to a veteran ranger in Kruger National Park. And this small journey was just one brief and tiny glimpse into the challenges that Kruger's rangers face today. With just a little under 4,000 rhinos left within its borders, Kruger, like we said, is a poaching hotspot and prime target for criminal syndicates. When I spoke with rangers and park staff in 2019, it was then that they predicted only 2 to 3 years remained before Kruger's rhino would be poached entirely from the park. Thankfully, rangers have managed to avert this tragedy, with rhino poaching incidents in decline for the 5th consecutive year. However, an unexpected twist comes in this story, as you experienced as this veteran ranger. It is the rangers' very success in keeping poachers out of the park that has led rhino horn trafficking syndicates to have to shift their tactics, targeting and recruiting park insiders as accomplices. Gathering information, recruiting informants, and even drafting poachers from the pool of park employees is now imperative for syndicate success. And during this last decade or so, syndicates have tested and refined this approach and have developed the ability to now convince and coerce rangers up and down the hierarchy to participate. At first, this recruitment, as you experienced as this ranger, often starts as a few drinks bought at a local watering hole, used later as a reason for owing information to syndicates. But then begin the subtle threats and other tactics towards coercion, oftentimes hinting at the known location of family members and times of their daily activities. Then, even humiliation aids in their endeavor to corrupt. An arrested poacher laughs in the face of a ranger, reminding them just how futile their attempts at protecting wildlife are, and instead urging them to turn to poaching as a means of not only earning community respect, but more money than their yearly salary can provide. The tactics surface in many forms, but one thing remains true. If you give in, you're an informant for life. The grant work I'm finishing up combines art and storytelling to provide a space for readers to anonymously engage with these rangers and individuals who are prime targets for poaching syndicates. Hopefully, by seeing the individual in the portrait, much like this glimpse that you had earlier, and experiencing their story, readers will find themselves in the shoes of these individuals and able to ask themselves the same difficult questions. What would you do if approached by syndicates? How would you dodge getting sucked into the poaching ring with your family on the line? It is often far too easy for us to feel disconnected from these darker parts of our society. But when we dive into a story by focusing on this human lens, it becomes a lot more relatable. When we start to ask, what is it that's actually driving someone to make a decision that we feel is so morally incorrect, especially in the case of a corrupt ranger, we start to see some of the truth behind it revealed. There's manipulation involved. There's also greed and environmental and economic history and other factors that set the stage for the current severity of the crisis. And it has never been more complex. With that, there has also never been a time more crucial than this moment to support rangers. In the case of Kruger, rangers face the largest threat to their work in the history of the park. It can be hard to predict who's susceptible to this type of corruption, but senior Kruger staff say that creating a work environment where rangers feel supported, valued, and know that their demanding efforts are meaningful may actually aid in Kruger's crackdown of inside involvement. But Kruger's former head ranger said it best to me when he said that even when presented with all of the silver bullets in the world, meaning all these different technological solutions to the crisis that can come in and save the day, such as drones or infrared-equipped helicopters, you still cannot replace the boots on the ground. And now, in the face of inside involvement, those boots on the ground, the people that we are honoring today on World Ranger Day, the rangers that are left operating with integrity, will continue to burn out as they shoulder the responsibility to protect the world's wildlife and global heritage from criminal syndicates, which for now, in the case of Kruger and potentially other parks, include their own. Wildlife lovers exist across the globe, but at this point in time, a love for a species is simply not enough. In only loving a species, we continue to project the entire responsibility of protecting this wildlife onto the shoulders of rangers, of park staff, local individuals, and conservationists. Instead, now is the time to embrace the fact that we actually hold the ability to bear some of that weight ourselves. By being a supportive voice to uplift rangers, by being the hand that lends financially when we can to organizations that are directly supporting the boots on the ground, but most importantly, to be inspired to view and share this often wildlife-centric narrative from the voices and stories of the humans that are involved. Sharing these stories of this lesser-known side of the poaching crisis and helping to shift the existing narrative to one that centers the voices of individuals on the ground holds true power for impact. Because listening to rangers and the challenges they face is instrumental in understanding how to tackle the complexities fueling poaching. And above all, supporting rangers is crucial so they don't burn out as we continue to find solutions. So thanks so much to the rangers. They're the real superheroes on the ground in these conservation stories. And quite honestly, we owe them everything for their sustained efforts, sacrifices, and also this unwavering determination in the face of unthinkable challenges while saving species. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tara. That was great. I love the way you weave that story for us, put us in those shoes, and you could almost feel like you were feeling kind of that pressure and the weight of the world kind of coming down on your shoulders, and feeling like there's nobody you can turn to. I think that's kind of the worst part. Feeling the only way out is to kind of give in.
Yeah, it's an unimaginable amount of pressure, and just by being so fortunate to have rangers in Kruger speak with me about those challenges. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but it's also, not being talked about. Kruger has kept it so close for so long because it's very easy when people hear that rangers have, become involved with poaching. It's really easy to deduce it to a simple fact that, okay, paint all the rangers with the same brush. Every ranger is corrupt, and that's why poaching is continuing. But the core part of this story is that the exact opposite is true. Rangers have been so good at their jobs in Kruger that is what's led syndicates to start recruiting them from the inside. And there's so much stacked against these rangers when it comes to monetary incentives. And obviously, these threats and manipulations, the tactics that are being used against them are just really hard to withstand. So hopefully that comes across in this story.
Yeah. So you were able to spend some time with rangers in Kruger. Was it a bit of a process to kind of get them to open up, or were they eager to share their story?
So anonymity is a huge reason why folks were eager to share their story, especially given the pressures that the rangers in Kruger have right now. Not only are rangers being targeted by syndicates, but they've started to realize that the rangers are able to be clever, right? They're working around, as we heard in this story, the ranger that you all were, this veteran ranger, actively chooses to go out on poaching, on follow-ups where he knows he's going to encounter, 3 poachers in the bush who are also armed by himself because he feels that's more trustworthy than maybe bringing someone who's corrupt with him. And so they're finding ways to work around it and potentially weed that out. There's talks about using integrity management and trying to implement that in the park when they're hiring employees. But, rangers also need to be careful about their identity. Not only syndicates already know who they are, but if they're talking about this issue actively, there's a chance that syndicates may also try to use more indirect approaches to remove them from the park. And we saw that happen with, allegations being made in terms of torture and racism against high-level rangers in the park. And in the 2 months that he was out of the park on while this investigation was happening, 50 rhino in his area were poached in his absence. So that's also another developing tactic, which is presenting a huge challenge for rangers. So yes, they were willing to speak with me and talk with me, but under the caveat that we will not be revealing identities of those who are really, really at risk, and also still doing an incredible job, protecting that wildlife, because sometimes having that identity revealed might be the very thing that gets them removed from being able to continue doing their job.
Yeah. It's interesting how things vary from country to country, because we spoke with some rangers this morning, where there's a good growing relationship between the prosecutors and the poachers, and they're seeing justice being served and poachers ending up in jail. Where it seems, where do you think the disconnect is? Is it with the police? Is it with the prosecutors, or is it just all three of them just aren't connecting?
I mean, there's corruption throughout, but there's also really golden, incredible folks throughout as well. I've had the pleasure of working with one of the lead prosecutors in the Rhino Court. It's the Skakuza Regional Court in the southernmost part of Kruger National Park. And it's the only court that's actually inside Kruger's boundaries, which is huge, because that means that when rangers are testifying against poachers, they don't have to exit Kruger itself. They don't have to drive, 3 hours to get to another court in a township where, a lot of poachers will be in attendance. And the threat there is high because they're revealing their identity to that entire community while testifying. But that Rhino Court, the lead prosecutor there, she gets things done. And it's great to have those individuals on your side. But on the other hand, when the Skakuza Regional Court closed down in August of, 2019? It was closed down because of corruption within the courts. A corrupt magistrate was involved. At least this is my understanding of how that went down. And so there's just this constant tug of, you have the incredibly dedicated handful of folks who are the rangers and prosecutors and, individuals running NGOs who are just grinding all the time to protect these species. But woven into all these different sections are people who are corrupt. And it's because it's so easy when syndicates have the amount of money they do and the amount of influence that they do. And you start thinking about what that actually looks like when these threats occur, when other, manipulation tactics and things are involved and the money's there. It's not surprising that people get persuaded, especially when your family's on the line too. It's a really challenging situation. But there also is greed, right? There also are those folks who get involved because they want to build a life for themselves that they can't sustain otherwise. And once they get that first round of money from being involved, it's kind of this vicious cycle. They need more and more poaching to sustain this livelihood that they've built. So there's a lot, Joe.
We can see how with that kind of pressure, how it quickly becomes a no-win situation. You can't see a way to stand up sometimes.
Yeah, it's very tough.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned, before the court was closed in Kruger, offering some kind of form of protection, not having to leave the park. Do you see an effort being made to provide more protection in some way to those who do stand up and do report what's happening?
So I can't speak directly to what Kruger is doing. They have it's probably a very long timeline to figure out those things. But in speaking with senior Kruger officials, this idea of using a much larger integrity management plan that actually includes incentives and things for rangers who are operating with integrity to feel more supported is a huge part of making sure that their workforce feels like they're not out there with futile attempts at saving wildlife, catching the same poachers multiple times because they're not being prosecuted and because they're getting out on bail. I think there's a lot of ways that Kruger is exploring how to tackle inside involvement. It's just really challenging as a huge park like Kruger is. It's also a national park, so it's not dealing with the same it's dealing with more challenges in terms of restrictions from, pushback from worker unions and things like that than maybe these smaller private reserves of, the greater Kruger ecosystem are dealing with. Where on those private reserves, a lot of these folks have been able to implement integrity testing to the degree where they're able to actually weed out people through a combination of, polygraph testing and sophisticated ways of analyzing their staff throughout the park to make sure that they're not potentially involved. And if it's deemed that they are potentially involved, they can take action on it in terms of moving their employment within the park or taking more drastic measures. But Kruger is not able to do that since these worker unions, it's not in the contract that you can actually act upon any sort of integrity testing at this time. And that's a huge challenge in and of itself. Also, Kruger has folks coming in. It's not just a small contained private reserve, right? It has, thousands of safari vehicles coming in and out every day. There's maintenance vehicles. There's hundreds of employees that work in the concession stands, in, the nursery where the plants are being grown, at the golf course. Like, there are so many people in this massive park, right? This park is the size of New Jersey. Yeah. It's huge. So there's just, like I said, it's complex, right? We haven't even dived into, the history of Kruger and understanding how the park was created and how that might have had locals feeling, excluded from the benefits of conservation to begin with. There's so much, Joe. There's so much that's contributed to where we are.
Yeah, well, we can push people somewhere if they want to dig a little bit deeper. You recently had an article published on nationalgeographic.com. So I'm going to share that link here if people would like to check it out. So this is a really big link, but I found this link just by typing Tara Keir National Geographic, and it came up there too. So it might be easier just to type that into Google and you can find it, Tara Keir National Geographic. Or if you screenshot that really quick, I guess you can track it down. But
yeah. Thanks, Joe. It's a really interesting story focusing on one of the most extreme and exemplary cases of inside involvement, where this guy, Rodney Lindella, who was arrested 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago now, still hasn't been tried, but was found to be involved with poaching rhino. And he was, what everyone thought would be the next head ranger of Kruger. So a huge disappointment and kind of shattering reality that hit Kruger with that. So yeah, if you like a good crime story, that might suit you.
All right. Excellent. Well, great work, Tara. And congratulations on, the article being posted. I'm sure there's more to come. I know you're always working different pieces of media and such. So I have no doubt that there's more to come with this story.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Joe. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, have a great rest of the weekend and hopefully we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.